Hello, and welcome to another SkaredCast tactical video, exclusive for you, the Patreons. Today, we're looking at Mission 4 of the ITC Championship format. This mission is probably one of the most entertaining ones, as you get to place your objectives, which means that the art of objective placement comes back. So during this video, you will see me place the objectives on the back table here, on this cool mat provided by Hot Dice Miniatures. Check the link key down below. And we're going to go through every single deployment style and how to best attack the mission in order for you to be better at this ITC game. So stay tuned, I hope you enjoy it and you use some of the cool little tips and tricks that I will play for you today. Let's place the objectives down and begin. Okay, so let's start with 12 inches up from the board edge, long board edge deployment. Now in this mission, we have 5 objectives. One gets placed right in the middle of the board. And then your opponent will get 2 objectives, and you will get 2 objectives. Now the bonus in this mission is if you control both objectives that you place on the board, you get a bonus point. Now starting with the player that did not choose their deployment zone. So say I didn't choose my deployment zone. My opponent has their 2 objectives, and I have my objective. I get to place one anywhere on the board, then he gets to place one anywhere on the board, and then I get to place one in his deployment zone, and he gets to place one in my deployment zone. So, what's something I should not do? I should not go to his deployment zone and put an objective in his deployment zone. Why? Well, very simple. Then he places the objective he can place anywhere on the table in his deployment zone. And remember that second objective I have to place? I'm forced to place it in his deployment zone. Which means that if I do the mistake of placing an objective in his deployment zone or near his deployment zone, he'll be able to stack the board. Then he gets to put one in my deployment zone and can essentially pick left or right to make it very hard for me to play the game. So, big pitfall. Do not go ahead and put your objective that you can place anywhere on the board in his deployment zone or near his deployment zone. What's probably the best place to put that objective is to put it in your deployment zone. Now, if you can also zone it out. You can't place it within 6 inches of a board edge or within 12 inches of another objective. So if you put it somewhere here, he can't put an objective back here if you don't want him to corner you. If you don't want to be spread out too much, put it towards the middle there so that wherever he decides to put it, it's relatively straightforward and placed. But your first objective placement will vary basically on your list and how you want to play the game. And then he will essentially try and make it hard for you to put something over here and there. So, their objective placement, they get to put one anywhere on the board. Say your opponent is smart enough and puts it on their board. Then you get to put one down in their deployment zone. So if you want to split their army up, right, make sure you spread them out. If you want them to, if your army is like Talos or something that'll kill stuff, keep them close together or towards the middle, so then you can, and then he will put one, and depending on what he wants to do as well, it can be handy. So, with that deployment, that's probably one of the most simple ones. So yeah, leave a comment, let me know what you think. Now, this is very similar to pointy Dawn of War, where if you have, 9 inches from the middle, and you have a triangle instead of the full deployment. However, in this style of deployment, which is a hybrid of the basic deployment type, right? You're going to have a little bit less leeway, especially on the corners, because you can't really put an objective down here. In ITC, you measure to the edge of the objectives. So you're going to have to be placing your objectives more centrally. So if you put an objective, say, around here, and he can't place it over here, he's not going to be able to go too far down there. He's going to have to place it somewhere along these lines here. Okay, so the next deployment style that we're going to do is basic hammer and anvil. So in this deployment, it changes. You have halfway up the board or 24 inches up the board that way, you have 24 inches up the board this way. Now this deployment style can be a little tricky to get right because you have a lot of distance in between the two deployment zones, and that means that your objectives can be placed relatively deep. Now it's hard for your opponent to split you up as much, so you can't be spread out across the board that way, which means, once again, don't put it near your opponent's deployment zone. You know what your deployment zones are. If you don't want to be split up into two corners, put it more central so that he can place it up here or here. If your army is very aggressive, place it towards the middle so you can help control the middle. Then put his either on the corners, if you have deep striking stuff, spread them out, or, depending on where he places it, you can either counter. So if he puts his over here, and then he puts yours there, you can put it over here to split them out or to concentrate. So concentrate or spread out. Concentrate or spread out. Very simple stuff. Now the bonus in this objective mission is to capture both of the objectives that you placed on the table. That'll give you a point. So normally you'll be putting one near your deployment zone and one their deployment zone. So ideally you want to try to get your opponent to mirror you. So if you put one here, you want your opponent to put theirs on the same side of the board. And like that, it's a lot easier for you to try and get that bonus point by pushing hard up one side. If you or your opponent is smart, you'll try and counter it. So if I put one there, he's going to put one here, which means he's going to put one here, which means now I have to put one in his deployment zone, which will make it harder for me to get considering it's further away. And then he can put one over here to make, or you can put your next one over there. You get the general idea. Same thing with pointy hammer and anvil. Of course, you don't get as much leeway on the corners here, so you can't go as far up. But it's the same sort of thing. You kind of concentrate the strength of the objectives. You can have two here, you can have something like that, you can have something like that, you can have something like that, or something like that, based on what you're looking to achieve for as well. And that's how I would definitely do hammer and anvil. The key here is to not let that initial objective placement mess you up. Don't forget, your opponent has to put one in your deployment zone, and you have to put one in your opponent's deployment zone. So based on that initial deployment will really determine where you deploy or what side of the board you push up to, or if you concentrate your force or you spread out. Next is table quarters. So this one is a little bit more interesting for placing objectives, because you can place one anywhere on the board and then place one in your deployment zone, right? In your opponent's deployment zone. Now, you still don't want to give your opponent an ability to completely mess you up, correct? Because they have to put the second one in your deployment zone. So you can put one any on the board. I highly recommend you put it in your zone. Now, the key here, though, is if you put it, an objective cannot be placed within 12 inches of another objective or within 6 inches of a table edge. So if you want your opponent to put their objective close to the center of the board, then you put your objective towards the back. Why? Because they're not going to be able to put their objective within 12 inches, so about 18 inches from that edge there, and 12 inches from your board edge, or 6 inches. So essentially, if you put an objective in the middle-ish here, it forces them to put the objective here or here, because they can't be within 12 of this one either. So putting an objective in that general area, if you don't want to be too far back, really helps. If you want to give them more room to place it anywhere, this will give you more control over where they're going to put the objective, because they're either going to put it over here somewhere, or they're going to put it, or you've essentially blocked it off. So you can force them to put it on this side of the board to kind of generate more space. So if you want to do something like that, be smart about your objective placement. If you put it down here, all of a sudden you've opened up this whole area, and then they can put it over here and then jump this way and grab it or whatever. So that's very important to keep in mind, especially with this style of deployment, where objective placement, if it's going to be in the deployment zones, is going to be a lot harder. So say you put it over here, and then they decide to put it down here somewhere because they want to hide a small unit out of line of sight. So now it's your turn. So you know that if you've done this, you've essentially blocked off this area really for objective placement, because in ITC you measure to the edge, which means that they would have to place it. So now you get to place it. Say you place it here, right? 12 inches away from here. And now he goes, I'm going to put it over here. And then you ask him to measure again, and that is less than 12 inches. He tries to put it this way, this way, this way. You might be able to place it over there, depending, but more likely he's going to have to place it on this side. So now what's happened? All of a sudden, you know, you've created a zone of more objectives closer together. So if you play a very aggressive army that wants to control lots of objectives put together, that's great. If you want to play an army that's less, that likes more movement, you might not want to, you know, threaten him that way and kind of see what he does here, and then, you know, maybe spread it out a little bit to force him to spread out. All of a sudden, the objectives are much more spread out, as you can see over that. So with that sort of deployment style, very important to keep track of, you know, because it's aura bubbles for objectives, it's very easy to kind of force your opponent to place that objective in a certain area on the battlefield. Okay, and here we have Vanguard Strike. So, like Table Quarters, Vanguard Strike also opens itself up to being able to manipulate the deployment of the objectives. So, of course, you get first pick. If I put the objective around here, which is about 18 inches away from the bottom of the table, plus the width of an objective, I can force my opponent to not be able to place any objectives in this general area, right? So, putting an objective there forces him to put an objective there, right? Or can basically put it in this area. You can't really go further than that because that's 12 inches away. So you forced him to place his objective in this area or in this area here where he has a lot more room. Now, of course, if he's playing a very aggressive army, I might not want to do this because then it makes sure he pushes it. So what I might do is I might force his hand. You know, he can place his objective here. That's probably the closest he could. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 12 inches to that general zone there to stop him from placing an objective in that zone, which forces him to place the objective further away, giving me some more room, especially if he's got very aggressive army, gives me more room to maneuver. Space. Space can win the game. And because your opponent hasn't put the objective down, it's easier for you to coordinate that. So then you can do the same. Once he's put his objective down, you can kind of see whether or not you want to put an objective where, you know, you have a closer, or if you want to make a, you know, if you're forcing him to put the objective on this side, maybe you want to put the objective here so that you get more spread. So you can see here that the objective placement is an art form. You know, what do you want to do with the objectives? Do you want to concentrate them and try and get most of your army in a concentrated area, or do you want to spread them out and spread your opponent thin as he's trying to get objectives? So the beauty of objective placement is that if you want to concentrate all the objectives you can, if you want to spread them out, you can. And hopefully your opponent hasn't really thought about this mission in particular, because he's used to having all the objectives placed themselves. And when they place their first objective, they place it close to your deployment zone. So if you know that, or in your deployment zone, knowing that, all of a sudden you can really stack the objectives in your favor and take full advantage of your opponent's incompetence. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks a lot for Hot Dice Miniatures for the mat. This is a double-sided mat. They look fantastic. It's a Canadian company. Check the link down below for that. Thanks a lot, guys. I hope you enjoyed this part. The next video in the tactical series on ITC mission format. Leave a comment if you want more of these. And this is Skari, your grateful host, signing off until next time. Skari out.